Welcome to the Part 2 in-depth session. This portion will go through the time and billing features, the appointments, and the project section. To start, we'll look at the time and billing first, and we'll look at some things that you can set up in the program. Keep in mind that the setup options within the time and billing section, much of it is not imperative to set up, but there are options that you can use to make the system a little more automated. We'll begin by clicking the setup options here in the dashboard on the left-hand side. We'll start with the top section and work down to the bottom. The first thing we have here is called billing categories. These allow you to put in a variety of different categories in the system that you can then later associate your time entries to. So for example, we have a bookkeeping category that I've previously entered in the system. What I can do is I can put a few different time entries in the system. For example, I could put a few that are based on payroll, and I could put a few from my bookkeeping section and a few from another tab. But they may all apply to bookkeeping in general, so I could put them all under the category of bookkeeping once I enter them. What that later on lets me do then is in the time list I can run reports or searches of the time that's been entered in the system, and I could tell the program to show me a list of all the time that's been entered based on a particular category within a certain time period. So I could very easily say, show me all the bookkeeping category time that has been entered for the last 2 weeks, and it would give me that result. It's an extra report tool that you can utilize in the time list, but it is not something that you have to utilize. It is very much optional. The task billing setup allows me to tell the program to automatically know what to charge when putting time in on specific types of tasks in the system, including any customs or bookkeeping ones that I may have made. If you don't want to use this, at the very least you will find that the default descriptions for task types in the system do come from the Other Settings tab within here. So if you want to change the default descriptions, you will find them here. So what I can do is I can tell the program that as either a company-wide setting or as a per-user setting, whenever time gets entered on this kind of task, it should know to use a particular billing rate or a flat rate for the entire entry, or to automatically assign it to a particular billing category. I could even tell it what its default time entry name will be, what its initial status will be, any sort of color schemes that I want to use, so when it appears on the calendar it will have the appropriate color settings, and once again the default descriptions for both internal and invoice. But as I said, this is optional and it is not something that you have to use. It is just there if you want to. Next up below that, you have billing work code setups and non-billing work code setups. These work exactly the same way, with exception to non-billing work codes being for work that is not billable in your system. You can put as many work codes as you want in the program. And work codes, if you're unfamiliar with them, are often used like this. Let's say that no matter what kind of particular task I'm working on, it could be a group of federal tax task types. No matter which one I put in the system, whether it's some sort of monthly type or things that happen a few times a year or even just once a year, I always assign it code 300. So I can then put in a code that is code 300 and I can give it its proper name and description. And I can actually group by the work code on the invoice so it has a description that might encompass all that work. So it makes life a little easier for me in terms of the description side of the invoice. I can also, at the bottom of the work code list, there's an advanced button here, which allows me to restrict the usage of work codes to specific types of tasks in the system, meaning that people cannot choose the wrong work code when they're putting in the work for the system. Also, just like the task billing setup, we can do this as a per work code option by going to the work code billing information tab. And once again, you can do this as a company option or as a per user. So if we look at per user this time, we could say that when Adam enters time and he uses this work code, it's going to use this default name, this billing rate, these settings, and these descriptions. But when Bobby uses the same work code, it's going to have a different name with no category and these settings instead with these different descriptions. So you can get very specific in the program if you want to, but once again, this is all very much optional and you don't have to use work codes in the system if you don't want to. The non-billing work codes are exactly the same thing as the billing work codes, but just meant for unbillable time. Billing rates in the program allow you to put in a variety of different rates that you'll be using as hourly charges. You can tell the program to have as many different rates as you want, but the stipulation is they all have to have different names. They can have the same charges, but they all have to have different names in the system. Now you can also give default rates per user. And this is to tell the program, which is only one thing you'll need per user, that when Adam enters time here, if it has not been told to do otherwise, it will automatically choose $250 per hour when he enters time, unless some of the other settings have already been set up to choose otherwise. Now you don't have to put in default rate for a user if you don't want to, but you can, and it is there if you want that option to be available. You don't necessarily have to put in rates for the system though, because on any time entry you place in the program, you can just give it a flat rate if you wish. So as I said, many of the things in here are very much optional. The interruption reasons are for the interruption timer. The interruption timer is the icon under clock tools in the lower left on the right hand side. It looks like a stopwatch with a little phone icon in it. What it does is when you're using a timer currently and then you get a call from, let's say, another client, if you click the interruption timer, it will pause the one you're currently working on, and then it will call up the interruption timer in the middle of your screen as a separate one. So then you can list from a drop-down menu, these are the reasons here as to why you're getting interrupted. So very quick reasons with even default descriptions if you want. Once you're done with an interruption and you save it, the timer will move back to the original one you're working on, so you can just pick up from where you left off. So these are just quite simply a list of reasons to list from as to why you're using interruption timer. If you're not going to be using timers in the system, then these don't apply to you. The taxes in the program allow you to put in all the different tax rates, which will then have to be applied to groups so that they're accessible on the invoice. You'll have to put in the individual tax names and rates on the left-hand side. And then even if there's only one tax in that group, you have to assign it to a group and give it a code and then say which ones apply to it so that they're usable in the invoice. If you don't plan on using the invoices within the client track software, then these once again will be not applicable to you because it won't matter. But if you do want taxes to choose from for your invoice, then this is where you're going to want to do that. Finally, in the general options, there's a list of checkboxes here on the left-hand side at the top. What they do is they force your users to make sure they have to choose specific settings when they're saving their time entries to the system. By default, the program forces you to at least choose a client name, whether it be business or personal. We suggest you keep this in the program, including even if you're having to enter time that is just for administrative work in the program. So if you're doing administrative work and you're still being forced to put it to a client, what we suggest is you actually create a business client that is your own company, and then you can assign any administrative time to your own company in the system. As I said, by default, it forces you to choose at least a business or personal client. You can force them to choose a billing rate, code, category, and even put in descriptions. But you don't have to use this if you don't want to. There is also one single checkbox here on the right-hand side, and if you activate this, what it will do is when a time entry is saved in the program, it will automatically be locked. When time is locked, only an administrator can unlock the time to then make modifications to it. So this could be something that you want to have as control of over your office, which means that they would have to ask permission to make modifications for any saved time in the system. Lastly, you'll find that there is different form types for the calendar and quick entry types here. By default, they're listed as the advanced and horizontal time entry forms. If you're going to use the very specific setup that the program knows how to charge everything when it's selecting a specific work code, you may want to use the simple and horizontal time entry forms because they only allow you, the user, to enter who is it for, how much time did they spend, work code, category, and description. And that's all they can choose. If you want more options when you're putting in your time entries, you'll want to use the advanced and vertical forms. And these are the two that are going to be explained in this video. So that's all it takes to do the setup for your time and billing section. And as I mentioned, just to point it out one more time, much of that is not necessary, but it can make the system much more automated for you. Now we look at entering time. Time can be entered in a variety of different ways. One way in which you can enter time is to go to a live timer, which can be found in a few different spots. One location that you'll find them is anywhere you see a task in the program, it'll have a green start timer directly on it. And if you click that timer, because it's allocated to the client and the task, it'll know that it's for that client and that task type because it's directly allocated to it. So same thing from the task list. Also, in the personal clients list, there is a timer that's allocated directly to each of their names. And when you click this one, it'll know that it's for that client and the fact that it's personal taxes because it's from this portion of the software. Lastly, under your clock tools in the very lower left, there is a generic start timer which will know only that you're spending a certain amount of time but not who it's for or what you're doing. And while you're working on any timer, below there as well you'll see there's a pause button. So whenever you pause a time, click the green button in the clock tools to actually resume from where you left off. The red one will stop any timer you're currently working on and call up the time entry details so you can verify the actual entry itself. And once again, the interruption will pause the one you're currently working on and then start a different one in the middle of your screen so you can record for the interruption. When you stop a timer, it will call up the entry, which looks like this. And this is another method of entering time by simply just clicking on your calendar here, and you can open up an after-the-fact time entry method. But this is what a timer looks like when it's finished. It comes up at this window and shows you these details. So if you've clicked one that was based on a task type, it would already know in here which client it's for and what it is, and also the amount of time you spent. Now, if you're doing it after the fact, when you just simply click on the calendar, it will open up a single time entry. So then you can come in here and you can say, I worked on this client's file, and it was for this kind of work. And you'll see that when you select a specific task type, it fills out other detail based on it. You can then say how long did you spend, was it applicable to any categories or work codes, and then in the billing info you can say whether or not this time entry is billable and what charge you're using. Then you have your internal and invoice descriptions, and lastly, we said we did the work for the beauty salon in the general tab, but they may be owned by a bigger corporation, so we can go to the Bill Time To tab and bill it to the bigger corporation that owns them. When you're done with your entry, simply click OK and it places it onto your calendar. Where that can become inefficient is if you have multiple time entries to place in at the end of your day. Then if you do it this way, you have to wait for the individual entry to open, fill out your details, and then wait for it to save. And then wash, rinse, and repeat that process over and over, which can be a little time consuming. If you'd like to do it a little faster with multiple entries at the end of your day, another after-the-fact method is to go to your quick entry icon on the left-hand side. So that looks like the letter A on your keyboard with a stopwatch on it, and it brings up this vertical form. Now, what we'll want to do with this is we'll want to say, when did we begin our day? So let's pretend that we started at 10 a.m. this morning. And then we're going to say that our first meeting was an hour and 45 minutes. Now, it was for the home builder for a particular task type, and you can see a lot of stuff is filled out here. We're also going to tell it which of these fields we're going to be using for most of these so it knows what it can clear out if it's possible. And then when we hit save, it'll increment to the next available time in my day so the window stays up. Meaning it's very easy to now say, okay, well, and now I'm going to put one in for this one. And let's say it was not for a particular task type. The next meeting was an hour long, and it was for a lesser charge with whatever descriptions you want to place in because it's something that wasn't a task type. Save and next. So once again, the window stays up, it increments to the next available time in your day. And you keep doing this over and over until you're finished. When you're done, simply click the close button and it will populate the items on your list. Now that you've had a chance to put in your entries in the program, the detail on them is not so easily viewable from the actual task calendar itself, but one thing that is nice is if you look at the month view of the calendar, it'll show you the total amount of time entries in that day and also the total time spent. If you'd like more details, you'll want to go to the time list itself. And then from here you have a wide variety of columns which will list all of the different information about those time entries, and you can also view them and edit them from here. So you can use this section to create searches of pretty much anything you want to see, and also export it to Excel by using the Export to Excel button at the top of the list. If you want to do any searching, click the magnifying glass in the upper left-hand portion, and then combine your options that you want to see to get what you're looking for. So I could do something simple like everything for this client, let's say that has not been billed, for all date ranges. So we have an entirety of one entry at a total of an hour and 25 minutes for this client with a charge of $354.17. Now I could maybe narrow that down further. Let's say the result was much bigger than that and I wanted to see only the ones that were entered by Adam. I could say, show me also then only the ones by his name. Or I could be a little more broad and I could say, show me everything that was entered by Adam regardless of whether or not it's been billed for all date ranges once again, and then run that search. So if you wanted to specify a date range of an actual pay period, then if Adam's putting in both client time and administrative time, then I'll know that I have a total of his actual hours that he's worked in the system. So the more things you combine in your search results here, the more particular your result is going to be. For extra reporting tools that you can play with, there is a report wizard at the top of the software. And one of the ones that is very commonly used is the employee timesheet report with amount details. So you could once again select which user and also the date range that you'd like to see and generate this report, and it will break them down by both the names and the days and then give you a final total at the end. Now if it comes time to creating an invoice in this section, what you want to do is go to the Create Invoice portion in the dashboard on the left-hand side. There are 3 invoice creation methods here, so you want to start by clicking the client that you want to make the invoice for on the left-hand side of your list. It will show you at the top of the section the total outstanding WIP for this particular client. You can then use one of these 3 methods and either send that entire amount or specific entries to this invoice. The method on the left will send all the original details to the invoice without modifying or changing anything, and it will show the original total. The one in the middle will send all of the original details in terms of the line items to the invoice, so they'll be viewable, but it will ask you to put in whatever total you want to type here instead. So you may want to round that 354 to 400. The third one is more for a scenario where you're going to be charging this client a lot of different entries, but you don't really want them to see any of the original detail. So what this does is it hides every last item that you're adding to this invoice and then comes up automatically with a window right after that then asks you, what custom lines do you want to put on here? For starters, when you first begin with the program, you're going to want to click the Manage Your Custom Invoice button and actually add in some default descriptions in the program so you don't have to type everything out each time. So you may want to put one in that is called the usual, which may be all of the things that you normally tell to your clients, which just sort of encompasses your work. I wouldn't worry so much about the dates or the amounts or the tax codes because these things will change as the days go by. So what's really important is a name that you can recognize and then your description, which could be, this is usually what I tell my client. Then we may have another one for license fee. And this one may have a constant of $50. So you could put in a constant of $50 on that. And any other items you want to add on here. Once you've had a chance to put in your saved custom descriptions, you can then either click the green button to put in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 lines in here. Choose from your descriptions that are placed in the system. And then type your amount. So let's put that back in at 400. And then when we hit save and close, instead of it showing the original details, we're only going to see the lines that we added and then the subtotal and final amount. Now regardless of which one of these creation methods you use, you can do any one of these from any one of these. So if I create the first one, I'm going to show you the second one from there and then remind you of the third one from in there as well. So this is a standard unedited invoice. The first thing you're probably going to want to do is go to the adjustments here and then go into the invoice options, and within the general tab you'll want to probably change your starting invoice number so that it matches with where you currently are in your systems. So if you're working with 3038, make this 3039 and then don't worry about it. Your numbers tab also allows you to put in what your company number is, because in some cases you are obligated to put that on so that it does show on the invoice, and this is where you can put it. If you require a second number, that option is there as well. And then you can also choose what your default tax rate is from the program. Now, many people will ask us how to get rid of the secondary blue bar here, as well as the grid lines between the columns themselves. So if you want to get rid of the blue total bar, it is under Formatting, the top left checkbox. And then the four that say grid lines allow you to get rid of the lines between the columns. So if you remove this, it will look a little cleaner. Now also, if you want to control the type of printing that you're doing, because let's say you have a monochrome printer, you can go to the Colors tab within Formatting and change everything to black on white. Be very careful of your fonts, however. Make sure they are a different color from the background. Otherwise, if you're making everything white, it's very hard to distinguish white from itself. So it's a little more clean. Now you may also want to remove some of the columns you're seeing in here. So if we go to the Columns tab, from here we can change the names of any of these columns, the order in which they appear, the percentage of width they're going to use, and they have to make sure they all total 100 at the bottom. You can also outright remove the columns that no longer apply. So if we take out everything but the description and give it 100%, this is more than likely what you would normally be showing the client. So if this is what you wanted, you could simply go back to the main, post this invoice to save it to the AR, and then print it and do whatever else you need to do with this. Now, as I said, the second option that we looked at allowed me to keep the general default descriptions, but change the subtotal to 400, let's say. If I want to do that from here, I'm going to go to the Adjustments, click the cash register icon within here, and I'm going to activate the adjuster, change it to 400. You'll want to hit Tab to update, and if you'd like, you can also show a discount on here. So if you wanted to, you'd have to put in a negative sign, say negative $10. So we now have a new subtotal of 400 with a negative adjustment of $10, then our tax and our total. As well, if you'd like, you can put in a custom line on here by going to the Custom section and clicking the clipboard to add an extra line that actually explains why the adjustment is there. So as we said earlier, the third option then allowed me to hide every last detail and put in only a custom line or two. If you want to do that from here, you'll want to go to the Custom section, tell it to hide all the current WIP, then click the clipboard and ask it to put in whatever custom lines you'd prefer. And we've already seen how to put in default descriptions, so at this point we can just pop in a description and a total, and now we have a one-liner for whatever we'd like the program to see. So as we said earlier, when you want to save these, you'll want to post them to the system. And then those posted invoices will get placed into the View AR, which is on the dashboard, left-hand side of Time and Billing. The View AR is a very simple section. What it is meant to do is to show you quite simply when was the date of creation and what was the original charge, what were the original taxes, was there an adjusted amount, and if so, then what is the final with the adjustment, and is that adjustment positive or negative? If it's negative, it will show as a red number. And finally, how much has been paid so far? And you can make payments using the deposit button on the left-hand side. So you'll want to tell it which client has given you the payment, then you're going to say how much did they give you. You'll also have to say when you put the deposit in. And on the next tab, we can then either apply that entire amount to one invoice, or you can split it up amongst different ones by just continuously clicking the green button to split it up. So let's take the invoice number we created and put the entire amount onto that. So that will update. We'll show now $100 paid towards that so far. When an invoice is completely paid off, the paid checkbox will be filled out. Once again, you can export this list of invoices to Excel so that you can make any further listings or modifications that you couldn't do within Clear Biz itself. The next section up is appointments. Now this is a very easy portion of the program, but there's a few things that we can point out for you that you may not know. One of the things for starters is in the lower right hand portion there's an option here called Merge Appointments and Task Calendars. If you activate this, it will show you all of the tasks and appointments that you have scheduled on your calendar simultaneously. So this way I can see if I have any tasks scheduled throughout my week, and that way if a client's trying to ask me for a meeting, let's say at 12 o'clock on Tuesday the 29th, but I already have work from my tasks section I've got scheduled there, then I can ask the client, well, how about we go 2 o'clock that day, because I've already got something else I've got planned. So this way you're not stepping over your own toes. You don't have to bounce back and forth from one calendar to another just to try and make the comparison. With this option activated, it will also take effect when you're using the overlap function. So I'm just going to put in a couple of examples here to go along with this. Now another thing you can do as well is when you create an appointment, you can make this appointment private. So if you do so, then people are going to know that you're busy for this allotment of time, but not exactly what you're doing, and they couldn't see it unless they were logged in as you. So now if we tell the overlap here on the left-hand side to show me, let's say, everybody's calendar. With the task merge option activated, it's going to show me not just everybody's calendar and separate our names by color. It's going to show us all tasks and all appointments for all users we're viewing at the same time. So if it's now time to schedule a staff meeting, it is very simple to go ahead and do this. When you're done with your overlap, cancel out of it at the bottom using the cancel overlap button. Finally, the last thing to point out is under the File menu, there is an Synchronize with MS Outlook option. So you can say that you want to send your appointments, and what it's going to do on the next screen is it will ask you, which way would you like to go? Are you going from Client Track to Outlook, or vice versa? Then it will ask you, whose Client Track calendar are you syncing to the Outlook on this physical computer? And lastly, it will ask you, would you like to send everything, or would you like to specify a date range you'd like to sync up? We suggest that it's best you sync up only a week at a time, as the system will work with it better. This is a manual sync, so every time you would like it to run, you do have to run this manually, but you can run it as many times as you like. So that wraps up the appointment section. We have one final thing to go through, and that is the projects. So for starters, you won't have any projects scheduled in the program. What you want to do is you want to create your project templates that you can then schedule to your clients. To get this started, you're going to click the Manage button on the left-hand side. Then you're going to click the green button above the list here that is currently blank and create yourself a new project template. Now you want to give this project a name that is relevant to the work that you're doing. So we're just going to call this Big Job. This big job could require 10 different people doing 10 different things over a period of time to actually take care of this. So if that's the case, we want 10 different steps. For each different step that you add into the program, you can give it its own name, you can give it its own description, you can then also tell it which user is going to be assigned to this. You can then give it either warning dates relative to the start and finish date, which are actually set from the list view after it's been given to a client, or you can tell it fixed dates in between whatever date range you're looking for. You can also give them a time budget, either a fixed time or a time percentage. You can use a spending budget, and then you can also tell it to know what it should be charging, much like the task billing setup earlier that we looked at. So if you're recording live time on these, it'll know exactly what to be charging. And these settings are all particular to each and every different step, so it can be very specific if you'd like it to be. Once you've had a chance to set up all these steps in your project, click OK to save your template, and it's now going to appear on the list. Once it's in the list, you'll want to highlight it and then say which clients you want to apply it to, and use the green button to apply it to the clients themselves. So now that they've been applied, they'll appear in the project list. And you can run standard searches on them just like every other searching option in the program. So you can search by their statuses or the client that they're assigned to and various other items. One thing that is different about this particular list, though, is after you've had a chance to set the start and target end dates, you can actually use the drop-down in the upper right to sort by a specific project type. And if you do, it will break down the steps of the project within the list here, so you can see which ones have been completed so far. And when they are completed, if you click beside it in the same column, it'll give you more detail about that particular step. Also, if you do have projects in your system, the steps of the projects are going to be viewable from the task list. So you'll be able to run searches on these. And lastly, business clients will have a projects tab, allowing you to see from here which projects have been assigned to them. And you can also even assign them from here if you wish. So that is the in-depth part 2 video. Thanks for viewing the video, and we hope you have yourself a wonderful day.